You spend your life trying to heal what hurts. You name pain an error, a disturbance that must be corrected before peace can return. Yet Rumi challenged this assumption. He said the wound is not what separates you from heaven, but what opens it. Pain, he wrote, is not the enemy of peace, but the moment when illusion becomes transparent. It reveals that what you thought was control was only resistance in disguise. The wound is not an event in the body or the mind. It is the place where awareness sees itself without protection. You fear pain because it undoes the story of who you think you are. But what if that undoing is not destruction at all? What if it is the beginning of truth? Rumi lived in 13th century Persia. He was first a jurist, a scholar of law and reason, confident in the structures of order and faith. Then he met Shams of Tabriz, a meeting that shattered every certainty he had built. What he had studied as ideas became experience. What he once sought through clarity arrived through rupture. From that moment, his thoughts turned inward. His poetry became a record of transformation, not explanation. He discovered that awakening does not arise from comfort, but from the breaking of the mind's imagined completeness. Pain, for him, was the soul's education. You have been taught to escape discomfort. You define peace as the absence of disturbance and happiness as control. You plan your days around stability, believing safety to be a form of success. Yet the more you avoid pain, the smaller your world becomes. Every strategy of protection tightens awareness into fear. Rumi warned that avoidance is not safety, it is self-confinement. What you call stability is often the refusal to see what is changing. The mind that tries to defend against pain builds a life around resistance. But if the one who resists is itself an illusion, who exactly is it that needs protection? For Rumi, pain is not a punishment. It is perception, the moment when the mind sees its limit. The world does not wound you. Your own expectation does. The wound begins when reality fails to match the image you hold of it. This is not cruelty. It is correction. Pain is the truth removing disguise. It dissolves the false coherence of the ego, the one who thinks it knows what should happen. What feels like loss is simply awareness encountering what cannot be managed. In that encounter, a deeper intelligence begins to operate. If truth reveals itself through contradiction, why do you still call it pain? Rumi said love wounds illusion to restore reality. When the self that clings to its image is pierced, what bleeds is unreality. What remains is what cannot be taken, the awareness that love has never left. Pain, then, is not absence but intensity. Love does not always console. It clarifies. It demands that you stop mistaking comfort for wholeness. When love enters, the false self cannot remain intact. What feels like loss is the loss of the unreal. Love's purpose is not to protect you from suffering, but to awaken you through it. If love and pain are one movement of truth, what becomes of the word suffering? When pain arises, the mind immediately reacts. It asks why, as though explanation could restore control. It seeks reasons, causes, and remedies. Rumi observed that this is the ego's final defense. To interpret pain is to distance yourself from it, to remain the one who explains rather than the one who sees. But the mind that explains cannot transform. Understanding, he said, begins only when explanation ends. The need to know is the wall that blocks transformation. When thought stops seeking a story, the experience reveals itself without distortion. Can a wound still wound when you no longer insist on its meaning? You stop naming what happens. You do not call it loss or injustice. You let it stand without language. Slowly, something shifts, not in the event, but in your relation to it. Without judgment, pain loses its narrative and becomes pure experience. Awareness expands to include what it once rejected. This is what Rumi called surrender, not weakness, but the end of opposition. When you cease to fight what is, pain no longer defines you. It becomes transparent, a simple presence in consciousness. What once seemed unbearable becomes bearable, not because it has changed, but because you have. What remains of suffering when you stop refusing it? Rumi taught that healing is not the closing of the wound, but the recognition of what it reveals. To recognize is to see through illusion, not to reverse the experience. The moment you stop demanding that pain end, its meaning changes. What opens through it is intimacy with what is real, an intimacy that no comfort could provide. When you no longer divide experience into acceptable and unacceptable, you begin to live without defense. The wound remains, but the sufferer does not. When the you that resisted disappears, what is left to heal? In Sufi thought, every state of being is a mode of divine disclosure, a way through which reality knows itself. Rumi extended this to pain. What feels like breaking is reality showing itself through form. The wound is where finitude meets infinity. It is not a symbol, but a direct encounter between what changes and what does not. The ache you feel is existence remembering its source. The divine, he said, does not visit through comfort. It appears through exposure. When you feel pierced by loss, it may not be absence, but numbness pressing into awareness. If even suffering is revelation, where does heaven truly begin? You begin to see that the wound and the healing are not opposites. They are two moments of one movement, awareness realizing itself. Pain was never against you. It was the process by which illusion dissolved. What you call heaven is not a place you reach. It is the clarity that remains when division ends. Rumi's hidden truth is that nothing opens you to heaven except what removes your defenses against it. The wound does not reveal heaven above you, but within you, not through assent, but through recognition. When harm and grace become one perception, what more remains to seek? You understand now that pain was never separate from peace. Every wound was a question, asking whether you would see through or turn away. Each time you met it with awareness, the world became transparent again. Rumi's teaching ends in simplicity. Nothing real can be hurt, and nothing false can survive contact with truth. The wound was never a punishment. It was the correction of vision. When the difference between breaking and awakening disappears, the mind falls quiet. Heaven is not reached, it is recognized. The wound that opens it was never outside you. It was the end of resistance itself.